Welcome to Room at the Table, an opportunity for you to join me, Betsy Cerullo, and my guests for conversations about creating equitable and inclusive workplaces where leaders rise above mediocrity and our teams thrive. Pull up a chair. There's always room at the table. Welcome to another meaningful conversation on Room at the Table. I am Betsy Cerullo, your host, and welcome to my guests today, Laura Howell and Mat Rice, who will share about the critical work they do in their communities. Today, we're talking about the importance of treating those with developmental disabilities with respect, because so often this community is overlooked and continuing to be overlooked in these times. So please pull up a chair, enjoy your favorite beverage, and let's get started. Well, hello, wonderful people. Thank you so much for being here today. Laura, it's always good to see you.
It's good to see you, Betsy, and thanks for having Matt and me with you today. It's very exciting.
Oh,
yes,
absolutely.
Looking forward to the conversation.
Same here. I know we've got some really wonderful things to cover today, so we're going to get right to it. So tell me, Laura, let's start with you. How are your organizations navigating the funding shifts within the state and federal government at this time?
Well, that's a great question. So my organization is the Maryland Association of Community Services, and we are a nonprofit statewide organization of about 125 organizations that support people with developmental disabilities. And my members are largely nonprofit organizations as well, and they are community-based organizations, and they provide supports that help people live in the community. They may help someone get a job. They may help someone volunteer. They may help someone live residentially in their home. So they do really critical work. And to your question, it is a very scary time for us and for our members, which is why we exist. We've gone through some major budget challenges at the state level, and now we see, significant Medicaid cuts happening at the federal level, and we are very worried about the impact that is going to have on people with developmental disabilities and on community providers.
So you're basically having to work, I'll say 10 times as hard. And that might even be not enough.
I think that is accurate. We as a community are working incredibly hard, and it is really challenging and quite frankly, a very scary time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Matt?
I would tend to agree with what Laura said. My organization is People on the Go Maryland. We are Maryland's statewide self-advocacy organization, ran for and by those with intellectual and or developmental disabilities. So POG's membership is about 500 people at last count, and we have a wide variety of backgrounds and experiences, but all of us identify as people with developmental disabilities. Our entire staff and contractors are people with developmental disabilities. I have the privilege of being the executive director. And I think from a advocacy perspective, we're working with organizations like Max. We're also, working to reach out to our local self-advocacy groups and encourage them to reach out to their state and federal representatives. We've also created a social media team that's working on how we rebrand the conversation around disability. So in other words, reframing the conversation from people who are seen as taking from society by a certain segment of people to people that have something to offer.
Definitely. And since we're talking about some of the funding, I want to ask a question so our listeners know. Are you 501c3 or 501c6?
So right now, POG is working on becoming a 501c3. We're actually housed at the Kennedy Krieger Institute under the umbrella of the Maryland Center for Developmental Disabilities, or the MCDD for short.
And Max is a 501c3.
Okay.
Yep.
So, what I want our listeners to know, if you're reevaluating where you're putting your money, is to donate to both these organizations because they're so necessary. And actually, that has been my feeling. Is I've re-looked at from the company and a personal perspective, I've re-looked at where we have given our monies and now putting monies towards organizations that have had funding cuts. And that's what we have to do. You know, we don't like it, but how we can mitigate it is to get it out there to people. Just re-look at where you're sending your money and perhaps choose different organizations. Not that the other organizations that I've given to or anybody gives to are not as good, but to really stand behind people that have really been impacted by the cuts. That's how we take care of each other. So, Matt, can you share more about People on the Go's anti-fascism training? This will be very interesting.
I would be glad to do that. So recently, People on the Go created its very first anti-fascism training that was created with the help of our program coordinator, James Orman. And the reason why we chose to do that was because we realized our members are hearing the word fascism thrown out every day on television, on social media, maybe in discussions with their families or supporters. So we wanted to give a training that would provide some of the signs of fascism. We are not saying that any particular person or current figure or even movement is fascist, but what we're trying to do is give people the signs of fascism that they need to watch out for, like, you know, possibly infringing upon a group's freedom to speak or freedom to assemble, or in the case of the strong man. And I use that terminology very deliberately because historically fascist movements have been male, not saying females can't be fascist, they just haven't been yet. We're encouraging our members to look out for those particular signs. So it's an hour-long presentation with discussion thrown in, and we've done 2 of these so far, and I think it's very popular and very helpful with our members. We're not confining this behind a paywall. We want to make this a presentation that anybody with a developmental or intellectual disability can have access to.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, Matt, when you bring up what's out there in the news and social media, we've all seen it. There's so much misinformation out there and assumptions, and people are not getting the full picture of what, say, words fascism really is, what it means. And the more we educate people is, in my opinion, the way that we can probably decrease ignorance. And right now we have to do it harder and I think more intense.
I agree.
More intense. Laura, any thoughts on the program?
Well, I think it's incredible, and I haven't had a chance to sit in on it yet, but I really want to. I think what's interesting is in the last year, we saw some attacks on the disability community that were really unfortunate. when we had the plane crash, I think in January, and there were some allegations made that people with disabilities who were may have been employed in even an airport somehow had an impact on that tragedy. And I think that people with disabilities, who also, that's one part of someone, right? A disability, a gender, a sexual orientation, race. We're all a lot of different things, and I think that the anti-DEI movement has really affected all of us, but it certainly has affected people with disabilities because we've seen that specifically called out. And I really applaud Matt and his leadership and People on the Go for really working to educate people about for the signs, and knowing your rights and knowing how to navigate that. And I think we could all use that.
Yeah. No question. So the signs, and we see that, the word I want, whether it's hate or exclusion, has really bubbled up. So sadly, the issues that we see have been around for a long time, and it seems to be more at the forefront. When you both, in the work that you do, are there some more subtle signs that you see that start to trigger you both that your organizations have to do something different?
Absolutely. What I will say is, I've had conversations with some of our long-standing partners about, whether or not we remove terminology from our websites or our correspondence that refers to, the LGBTQ plus community or other types of identity. Now, I will say that I have, with the support of the POG board and broader membership, I have resisted the calls to do that because I think that the way you fight against ignorance is not by giving into it. It is by demonstrating your identity, all sides of your identity. I'm not saying that I think groups that make different decisions are wrong. People have to do what is best for them. But I want you to think about what comes after this period that we're in, and what are people going to look to when they look back at this period in our history.
The other thing I would add is that I think, community supports for people with developmental disabilities are funded, it's about half state funding and half federal Medicaid funding. So we rely on Medicaid and the state funding that then draws down federal matching funds in order to provide these critical supports and services. And community providers support a whole person. So if somebody has a developmental disability and is a member of the LGBTQ plus community, or is Black or trans or a woman or whatever the otherness is of someone, of any of us, community providers support that whole person. And so there are attacks on and demeaning, I think, of people with disabilities. We certainly see that, but it's the whole picture that affects people with disabilities and their ability to be who they are in the community. People with disabilities are no different from anybody else walking around with us, in that, we all have our own identities, and community providers at the moment are having to have those real discussions that Matt talked about, in terms of, if we use certain language or we support people in certain ways as an organization that relies on Medicaid dollars, will that jeopardize our ability to continue to provide these critical supports and services? And they should never have to make those kinds of decisions. People should be able to live their whole lives, not have to hide anything. And the organizations that support them also shouldn't have to hide or change how they support people. So we do see that, unfortunately, happening at the moment.
And people with who have developmental disabilities fall in every conceivable human group. Everybody.
Absolutely.
So it's not restricted to a woman, someone who's LGBTQ, someone who's of color. And I don't really get that the greater decision makers get how this is just impacting across the board, everyone. And that is so frightening. But for our listeners, can you both just share with me examples what type of developmental disabilities could someone have? I know there's the visible and there's the invisible.
I for example, I have cerebral palsy, which is considered a developmental disability. And, I'm also legally blind, so that's another aspect of my identity. But developmental disabilities run the gamut from those that were caused by birth injuries to chromosomal differences, like those folks with Down syndrome. Everybody, I think, autism is kind of the sexy, if I can use that term, the sexy disability that, and don't get me wrong, I love my autistic brothers and sisters, and I mean that both literally and figuratively, because I have a brother that identifies on the autism spectrum, and many of our staff also identify as autistic. But those are some examples.
And the only thing I would add to that is what the difference between what gets categorized as a developmental disability as opposed to a disability, which obviously we are part of the broader disability community, but a developmental disability happens by the age of 21 and is not expected to change in a significant way in terms of someone's ability to live independently throughout their life.
Okay. Now, see, I didn't know that when you said 21. I was not aware of that. And that's my hope, is that through the conversations that people hear, they get more information straight from the people that are involved in the work. So I appreciate that. So Laura, can you share the wins you have seen and also the challenges that you have seen in MAC's advocacy work?
Sure. Well, we're coming off of probably our biggest advocacy battle that I think that we've ever experienced. And I'm proud to say we've done it collectively with the Maryland Developmental Disabilities Coalition, which we are a member of. Matt and his organization is also a member, and then 3 other organizations, the ARC Maryland, the Maryland Developmental Disabilities Council, and Disability Rights Maryland. And those 5 statewide organizations do a lot of work to educate and to lead change in Maryland. And this year we really saw a huge budget cut in Maryland to developmental disability services. It came as a bit of a shock.
Yeah.
We knew that times were tough with the budget and that we might have some challenges, but we never expected what was the largest cut in the governor's budget was to developmental disability services at $457 million for the coming fiscal year, plus another $200 million in the last quarter of the current year. So it was a massive budget cut, and it really, it's hard to imagine how services for people with developmental disabilities would have continued in any really successful way had those budget cuts remained in place. And so we worked as a community, a really extraordinary community, from the moment those budget cuts were announced through to the very end of session, which was not that we're counting, but 83 days from the time the budget cuts were announced to the end of the legislative session. And, we just did everything we possibly could. We were boots on the ground, wheels on the ground in Annapolis, meeting with legislators, testifying. The developmental disabilities community has an unbelievable grassroots advocacy movement. And I think people don't realize that about our community. And the way I explain it to people is that historically, it really starts with parents. Parents who had children with developmental disabilities. And if you go back 50, 60 years and more, those parents were told to put their children in institutions.
Yeah.
And that was doctors, would call and say, or would meet with the parent and say, the best thing you can do is for you and for the child is put the child in an institution. We now know that is not a good option for people. And probably about 50 years ago, the movement started with parents who started to say, I'm not doing that. I'm keeping my child at home, which then put pressure and advocacy in first the education system, schools, to educate children with developmental disabilities, and that advocacy continues to this day. And then as those children grew up and left the school system and then needed supports as adults, our modern day community service system was created. And those parents fought from the very beginning for that child.
They did.
And they fight to this day. You can be at a bill hearing in Annapolis and see an 80-year-old parent, 85-year-old parent, testifying, walking the halls, because they are always going to advocate. What's a beautiful thing is that while the parents started the advocacy movement, they have been joined in a very powerful way by people with developmental disabilities advocating for themselves, people like Matt leading advocacy organizations that are comprised of people with disabilities, having really the most important voice, because Matt and our colleagues have the lived experience to talk about what is really happening. And then you have community providers, my members, and advocates who are just passionate about these issues and really don't give up. And that, to me, is ultimately the most incredible thing about our grassroots advocacy community, is that we don't give up. No. We don't stop. And this session looked more grim than any session I have ever been through. And it really was extraordinary. And so in the end, in terms of victories, to get to your question, because of a whole array of budget problems that happened and then became more apparent as session went on, we ultimately got over $1 billion restored in the governor's budget between this year and next year.
Fantastic.
I always say that's $1 billion with a B.
Yes.
We've never talked about
Right.
a number that starts with a B. We talk in millions and sometimes hundreds of millions, but never $1 billion. And it was really just an extraordinary victory that took
Absolutely.
thousands and thousands of advocates across Maryland to make happen.
Well, you know what? I'd like you to brag a little bit. Weren't you able to bring together over 1,000 people pretty quickly in Annapolis in the winter?
So,
We did. Go ahead, Matt.
So we have Developmental Disabilities Day that's in January. That one everybody kind of knows about, and that's usually over 1,000 people. But at one point during these budgetary conversations, almost on a dime, we called for a rally on Lawyers Mall, and I think, what was it, Laura, about 900 people?
Oh, it was over 1,000 people,
Yeah.
for sure.
Oh, okay.
Incredible.
Yeah, over 1,000 people came to a very cold night in Annapolis, and with 3 days' notice, and that is unheard of. To get a permit, to organize, and people moved heaven and earth as a community to be there and to make it known that this was not acceptable, that we could not survive this, and that something had to be done. And that was really, I think, a huge turning point in the campaign, this session. And, it still gives me chills to think about. And I'm really proud to just have been a part of helping to make that happen.
And it was peaceful.
Oh, it was very peaceful. It was loud, which was good. But loud and peaceful are two great things that we are allowed to do in this country. And it was really extraordinary.
Now, you and I crossed paths last month. Is there anything you want to share about the bill that was signed? Does it apply to this work?
Well,
your work?
So there were a few bills of importance to the disability community out beyond this huge budget battle. Governor Moore had as one of his priorities a model employer bill that would say that state government would do more to support employment for people with disabilities. People with disabilities bring incredible gifts to the workforce.
Yes.
And I'm not trying to be sappy. I'm just saying the truth.
truth.
It's what we see over and over again. And people don't realize that. And so I think Governor Moore stepped up and said, okay, we're going to lead by example and make this a priority. Matt, I don't know if you have something to add to that.
So I think that, the Maryland as a model employer legislation was really key because historically, people with disabilities getting into government has always been difficult. And to my mind, that is where we really need to be. Like, I don't care what part of what community you identify with. If you are part of a marginalized group, you need to see people in place that look like you. And historically, people with disabilities in government have, been a rare thing. So the Maryland as a model employer legislation, we all supported, because anything you can do to break down those barriers is so important.
Absolutely. And what I'm so proud of is some of the work that my company does is we support people with disabilities in the federal government and also in the state of Maryland, providing reasonable accommodation services and readers and scribes. And, Laura, you've known me for a long time. That's not my background, but we got into it probably about 15 years ago, and it is such fulfilling work. And the government employees that we support, I stand in awe of the work that they do, the speed in which they do it, the perfection, the brilliance. And it's just an absolute honor. It's an absolute honor.
Yeah, and we appreciate you doing all of that work to make help make, government jobs, which are, have historically been great jobs to have, more accessible. It's a win-win. It helps the employer and it helps the employee, which I think is great. The one thing I just wanted to mention really quickly as we talk about this is, one of the things I see when I see, job ads, and you see things like, must be able to lift 50 pounds. That is something from,
so old.
I don't want to say my age, but yes, it really goes back, and you still see things like that, even when there's absolutely no reason that job description needs to say must be able to lift 50 pounds. Really, the 2 times a year that somebody has to lift a heavy box, there's no one else around that can do that, so that you're not limiting access to a job for a reason that is not necessary. If it's real, it's real. But right. I think a lot of times we see people still thinking about what they need using kind of old standards that really, and you're really losing out on great employees by not just being a little more creative about thinking about how the work gets done.
Yeah. And as my colleague, Tracy Wright, who's my deputy director and director of training at People on the Go, often says, she says that we, meaning people with disabilities, don't often get the respect that we have earned because we don't have letters behind our name. Now, I want to be clear. I think scholastic education is valuable for anybody if you can find the resources and supports that you need in order to get and achieve that. But there are certain times when lived experience matters, and it might be just as good, if not better, than having a degree. I personally would like to see more people with disabilities in the public policy sphere. That's my thing. That's where I live.
Well, Matt, I'm happy to say that some of the people that we provide the services to in the federal government are attorneys, paralegals. Yeah. So, and I have learned so much from their work, and I'm grateful for that. And I'll tell you both that there are times when we've seen job descriptions over the years, because some of our work is staffing, that I'll see that line and we'll go back to the customer and say, why do you have that line in there? It doesn't really apply. And you know what? It's an old job description, and they'll take it out. So I'm really glad that you brought that to the forefront, because those of our listeners that are in that kind of work, it behooves us all to really read through the job description and comment back. Because the only way you're going to have the change, or you're going to open up a perspective, is why do you have this here? And ask the question. So I'm glad you brought that up. Well, as we're getting to the end, I want to ask you both, and Matt, I'm going to start with you. What is the one thing that you would like to share about how our listeners can support people with disabilities?
I think the one thing I would like to share is, just show up and share your experiences with POG as a whole. Share your experiences with your legislators. And, if you know somebody that wants to advocate and they have a developmental disability, I don't care what your background is. I want you.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
And you can reach out to POG through our info email, which is info@pogmd.org, and we'll connect with you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Matt. Laura?
And I would say I wholeheartedly endorse Matt's pitch for advocacy. That is a passion he and I both share. But I'm going to say even more broadly than that, it seems so basic, but treat people with disabilities the same way you want to be treated. We see so many people that feel either uncomfortable or they have their own emotional reaction. And people are people, and
Absolutely.
You may like them, you may not like them, but you don't know until you actually get to know someone. If you can, open a door. So whether it's, opening an employment door, whether it's opening a door to a volunteer opportunity, whether it's opening a door to just being a friend or, connecting with someone, people with disabilities want what we all want. That's
Absolutely.
kind of been the theme through this whole discussion. And, nobody, whether it's a person with a disability or anybody else, wants pity, wants to be treated in some way that is not the way you would treat others. People just want respect and opportunity and kindness. And I can personally say that's what I want. It's what I would like to see happen for people, for everyone, including people with disabilities. I think we would be in a much better place in general if we saw more of that across the board.
I agree.
Love thy neighbor as thyself. It's very simple. And if people would follow that, our world would be a much different place. Absolutely. So I just want to thank you both. The work that you both do is inspiring. It's so incredible, the difference that you make. And now it is even more important that leaders like you are so visible, so out there, leading the charge and teaching other people to pick up the torch, because there can be thousands and millions of torches.
Absolutely.
So I just want to say thank you both so much for this conversation. And you always have a friend over here that will fight that fight with you. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Thanks, Betsy.
Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. Please pass on this important conversation and these two amazing organizations to people that you know. And again, you may want to relook at where you're donating your dollars. So thank you both so much. And thank you all for listening today. Have a wonderful one.
Thanks for listening to Room at the Table. If you've enjoyed this episode, follow us on your favorite listening platform and share this episode with a colleague or two or three. For resources to help you lead with purpose and build more equitable workplaces, visit roomatthetablepodcast.com.